welcome to another episode of Read It with Whiskey. My name is Laura Juntunen and I am your host. I am a self-published author of Happy List Chokelist, a 5-step process to find your true happiness, as well as the post-apocalyptic series, the Shockwave series. Book 1, Transient Pulse, is now available. So today we have a very special guest, Dan Petrosini. He is actually the most published author that we have had on the show, and I was so honored when he agreed to fill me in on all of his author knowledge within this interview. If you are a self-published indie author, this is going to be a really good one for you. And if you like suspense and mystery and thriller type genres as a reader, then you definitely do not want to miss this interview. So first, a little bit about Dan. So Dan is a USA Today and Amazon best-selling author. He wrote his first story at the age of 10 and enjoys telling a story and joke. Dan gets his story ideas from exploring the question, what if? In almost every situation he finds himself in, Dan starts exploring what if this or that happened. What if this person died, was hurt, or did something unusual or illegal? Dan passionately believes people can realize their dreams if they focus and act, and he encourages just that. His favorite saying is, "The price of discipline is always less than the cost of regret." Dan likes to remind people to get the negativity out of their lives. He feels it is contagious and advises people to steer clear of negative people. He believes having a true positive mindset makes it feel like life is rigged in your favor. When he gets off base, he tells himself, "You can't have a good day with a bad attitude." So today we are going to be talking about Dan's book, Cory's Dilemma. His big music career break was because of a lie. Did someone know his secret? Cory struggled for years in Manhattan, but just couldn't get a hit. It wore on him and he was desperate. Late one night at the studio, he took a chance and it made all the difference. But was it a risk that could ruin him? Would he be able to live with what he'd done? As his career took off, the money, fame, and success came with a price he never imagined. His marriage was in trouble, and someone was out to destroy him. Would he lose everything he cared about? You'll love this suspenseful thriller because the lines sometimes get blurred, and the path to redemption isn't easily traveled. There's a little sneak peek of what we are going to be talking about in the interview with Dan today, so let's get into the episode. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, an interview podcast highlighting self-published authors. I am your host, Laura Juntunen. The purpose behind this podcast is to help authors grow their audience while also introducing readers to their new favorite authors. Let's get to know the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. And here is a little Laura J. Live update for you. So as I record this, it is June 12th, and this episode is coming out on Tuesday. So as you're listening to this, I am knee-deep in a lot of stuff going on in my life. Oh my goodness. So I recently quit my full-time job, and I have decided to take on a few different part-time jobs, so then I will have more time throughout the day to write and to podcast. So that means hopefully faster writing and editing, but it's easier said than done. So I am currently editing Oscillation Rising, and I want to have the editing done by the end of June so I can get it out to beta readers. Originally, I had wanted the editing done by the end of May, so I am quite a bit behind. But I'm not going to let that stress me out because there is really no time limit when it comes to getting your book out into the world. As indie authors, as self-published authors, we control when our books get out. And yes, having a timeline and deadlines is really important, and we should stick to them. However, if life comes up, we don't have people hammering over our head saying, "Hey, where's the manuscript?" So I'm really, really grateful that I don't have that type of pressure on top of me, because I know if I work in that type of pressure, it's going to go through. You're going to see it in the writing. So I want to make sure that this book is edited the way that I need it to be edited. We shall see when this book is completely finished, and you guys will be the first to know in the podcast. However, if you want details even sooner than these live episodes that go out on every single one of your favorite podcast platforms, then you need to join my Patreon. So all of my patrons are sponsors of the show, and this is really, really important because keeping Read It with Whiskey alive takes a team. It takes a lot of people to make sure that these podcast episodes get out every day, and those people are you, the listeners. So if you would like to sponsor the show with just a few dollars every month, I would be forever grateful to you. Making sure that I have enough time to get these episodes recorded, then edited and published, it really takes a lot. My Patreon members are the people who really help out in that department. So I just want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons. And if you are interested in becoming a sponsor, you can head on over to www.patreon.com/readitwithwhiskey. There are 3 different levels that you can choose from: the listener plus, and the viewer. Listeners get all of the episodes early. Listener plus get extra exclusive episodes that are not given to the public. And the viewers, they get so much. The biggest thing in the viewer category, though, is video content of all of the interviews here on the Read It With Whiskey podcast. Head on over to patreon.com/readitwithwhiskey and become a sponsor today. All right, let's dive into this interview with Dan. Hello, Dan, and welcome to the Read It With Whiskey podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today, Laura.
Yes,
and thank you for inviting me.
I am so excited to have you on the show. We will be talking about your book, Cory's Dilemma, in just a few minutes. But first of all, let's have you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
Well, I've been a storyteller my whole life, and I've always been fascinated with the art of storytelling. And as a young person, I was mesmerized when someone having a nice tale, and everyone was glued to this. And I said, wow, how do I get that kind of attention, I guess? So I wrote my first story when I was 10 years old. It was about a Martian. And unfortunately, I don't have it. I like many things in life, I try to declutter, and I throw away. But anyway, that was the beginning of the journey. And like many writers, especially when you're starting out, you have a great idea for a book, you start to get it going, and then all of a sudden you hit that soggy middle, and you go, oh, this is terrible, this is horrible, and then you end up sticking it in a drawer and you never finish it. So the thing that I've learned to do, especially the last, let's say, 10 years or so, is unless there's a major league problem, I'm going to type the end at some point. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, if it's not publishable, then maybe you shelve it. But I have to get to the end. That's my journey.
Yeah. So you're a full-time author,
yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So how long have you been a full-time author?
I probably went like 80% in 2001, and then full at 2004.
Well, that's exciting. So that's what, 16 years then?
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. Yeah. It wasn't particular. Well, anyway, it's a rocky journey. You know, it's not easy. It's not easy. So, but it's been fun. It's been fun and rewarding.
And you have 21 books published, correct?
That's correct.
That's
something
correct.
Like that. Yep.
All right, cool. And you have a few larger series that have 10 plus books at this point. And then you're just starting this new series, The Suspenseful Secrets, with Cory's Dilemma being book 1. Do you plan on turning this into a long series like your other series in the past?
Well, at the moment, there's 2 books out in the series. The third book in the series is I received just yesterday, actually, back from my editor. So I'm going to commence probably this afternoon, commence some of the rewrite. There's not much to do. And he's real excited about the story, which he's a New York guy. And he is, I sometimes ask him, did you like this? And he said, if I don't say something, that means I like it. And I said, wow, that wouldn't fly in my house with my wife.
Oh, no.
But yeah, so he was very complimentary. In fact, I just relate. He said it was a very compelling story, a page turner. I'm not really a thriller writer. I'm more of a mystery writer, but I could see this character. It goes more in the thriller genre. And he actually said if Cory was, if Jack Reacher, this is what he said. He said if Jack Reacher was a family man, he'd do exactly what Cory done.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes.
We'll see what happens. And
right.
You have self-published all of your books. Have you done traditional publishing?
Yeah, early on, I had the first 2 books, and it was very distasteful. episodes. And some of it, granted, is probably my naivety, right? Thinking that all we had to do was write the book, and then these people would take it, and next thing you know, you'd be sitting on a talk show, right? So I got a little bit, there's a couple of factors. One was just, it was unpleasant. I felt I was being taken advantage of. And that was true in terms of royalty splits and what the marketing promise was versus reality, which I think many people find that out. So anyway, I've decided to go on my own. I don't even call myself self-published. I call myself independently published because we have our own team. I have my own editor, beta readers, cover designers, proofreaders, the whole 9 yards. And the other thing that I do like about it, being somewhat of a type A person, is I can control a lot, which is dangerous. But you also can ramp up the number of books that you can put out. I put a lot of time in every day to this. So for me to be held to, let's say, one book a year would be torturous.
Exactly. Yeah, that process can be so extended. Multiple years go by and you still don't get a book published with traditional at some points.
Right, exactly.
So, and you're primarily, you said more so mystery, and now you're turning into this suspenseful series, or what are your other books?
Well, early on, I just wanted to write stories, right? So any story that I had in my head, and I even wrote a science fiction book, but I'm not a sci-fi writer. But I realized I wasn't really getting any traction when I was hopping genres. And as I started to become a little more, let's say, knowledgeable in the industry, people kept on whispering in my ears, you better write a series. So I didn't, the first series I wrote, which is the Luca Mystery Series, didn't start out to be that way. It was a story that I wanted to explore traumatic brain injuries. I saw a documentary on HBO called Crash Reel, and it really was a story about 2 young guys, one of which was Shaun White, that famous snowboarder, when they were going through the Olympic trials. The second fella who was in competition, when it was actually better than Shaun White, but during the trials, he fell and sustained a traumatic brain injury. So now the whole documentary now shifted to his recovery and the family dynamic, because he had a brother with Down syndrome that he's very close with. And it was really a very, very, it made me cry. That's the only way I could say it. Watching it, I was so drawn into it. And then it started to percolate in my mind, what would happen if someone was, accused of murder, but had a traumatic brain injury and really couldn't recall whether or not he did this and all that jazz. And that made me start to write this book. I wrote this book, and then of course there was a murder, and I had to have create a detective to investigate. And I realized that the detective hijacked the book, and I said, because I loved writing him and he was great. And then I was stuck with this 100,000 words that maybe should I make 2 books out of it? What should I do with it? I pared it back and I decided that if this book went well, then I would make that a series based on the detective. And it was received well, and sales were good on the book. And I got excited, and I peeled off and I started writing, and it was well received. So I got a little bit lucky with him. He's not Harry Bosch, but it's Frank Lucas.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about writing a series about a detective or someone who has a job where they have things going on like this, where a new mystery can come up with every single book. There's no end to the series then, because you can just keep on going more and more stories.
Right.
But with that series, I haven't read that series, but I'm curious, with those 12 books, is there an overarching storyline throughout all of the books? Does he continue to grow? Is it more so just about the mysteries?
Well, each individual case, if you will, is a standalone story, which is what I like. As a reader, frankly, first of all, I should mention this up front about the series thing. And the reason why I never thought about writing a series, because I'm not a series reader. I'm really not like that. Give me a storyline, and then I'm in. I don't care if it's book 7 or 9 or whatever it may be. So I wanted readers to be able to enter the series anywhere. So you could pick up book 7. Of course, you're going to miss a lot of character development. You're going to miss, what goes on in the lives of the main characters that appear in most of the books. So there's a lot of growth there, and he's very real. My guy is real. I mean, he has no cape. He has the same pimples that we all do, and same struggles day-to-day life that we all encounter. So I made him really real. He's as I made a reference to Harry Bosch, I wish I would have wrote him, but he's a little out there for me. I mean, it's a little, some of that stuff is just a little, there's no bang, bang, shoot him up in the street type of thing. That's not what my guy does. But anyway, the series is going well. And in fact, I just started to write, I published just recently a small novella in the series that goes back. It's kind of a prequel. Okay. So that just came out, I don't know, less than 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'm writing book that was actually be book 14 in the series now. I just started. I got a couple of thousand words down. So I'm going back to Luca because people are pushing me for some stories. So.
They want more.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But I like to do different. As a writer, you want to. I'm sure you experience it yourself. You want to explore different subjects, different things. And I had a couple of ideas, particularly in the book that you read, that was rattling around in my mind for a while. And I said, I got to find a way to write this story and maybe I can create a series out of it. And I've written 3 so far. So I'm going to come back to Cory. I will come back to Cory. I don't know how many books it'll go. I don't think at this point, I don't think I have enough ideas to get it to like 7 or 8 books, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, let's dive into Cory's dilemma then. So tell our listeners what Cory's dilemma is all about.
Well, he's a very successful session musician. So a session musician is somebody that doesn't headline. He's not a headline act. But he's the people who really behind who play in the studio sessions. They're on the albums. Sometimes they tour with the major act, but they're not the headliners. So they're basically paid by the session. They come in and get X amount of dollars to lay down whatever it is. In this case, he's a guitarist. He's a guitarist and a vocalist, and he's wanted to have a breakout, but he's never been able to get a breakout. And he's approaching his mid-30s. He's got one last shot, essentially. So he goes into the studio to make his last demo. It's late at night. Late in the studio, there's this major league act that he's played on all of his albums. And he's there in a room composing by himself, and he talks for a few minutes. I don't want to give away too much, but essentially he gets the breakthrough. But the reason why he gets the breakthrough is based on a lie. So I'll give a little bit of a tease. The major star ends up dying. He overdoses in the studio. And Cory goes there and sees him, and he's like, oh my God, he sees on the piano a bunch of compositions that have never been released, and he takes the compositions. And this guy was a hit machine. This guy was, and this is true. I mean, in the industry, there are a lot of guys who just, if you look behind the scenes, these guys have written not hundreds, but scores of hit songs, right? It's the same people behind them. So this guy was one of them. He steals those 8 songs, I think it was. He's not sure what to do with them, but then eventually he puts them out and he becomes a smash hit. He becomes, he tops the charts. Of course, it's based on a lie. And now that lie starts to catch up with him.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it does catch up. Yeah.
Yes, I was so intrigued when I first jumped into the storyline. I don't think I read the back of the book prior to jumping in because I just like to be surprised by stories. So I jumped in, and then right away this guy dies and he takes all the music, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, oh my goodness, just like my moral self. I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't steal that. I couldn't do it. Yeah. And that's something Cory struggles with throughout the entire book then is this right? Is it wrong? Like, I'm making it big off of someone else's work. And it's a whole internal battle that he finds himself in. And
so he has the internal struggle, which you're mentioning, which is something that, morally, it haunts you. It haunts you, right? Yeah. When we all know we do something wrong, but doing something wrong on that level, and then getting all the accolades and cash that come along with it really heightens that feeling that you're an imposter, if you will, right? You're an imposter. And then you have the other struggle that he ends up going through. His life starts to fall apart, obviously, because of the guilt. But then there's this other major thing that's happening in the story that really drives the external battle. So there's an external battle going on too. So you have the internal struggle and the external, which kind of covers both of the global and then the internal. Exactly. So I mean, obviously, I'm partial to it. At what some readers were bummed out that the guy they felt he was, I say jackass if I can on the.
Oh yeah, you're fine.
Okay, that he was a jackass, and true, but that's what really happens. That really happens. What happens, and I think there's a story of vindication as well, a redemption, I should say. The next 2 books follow that as he's making this big. In fact, the book I just wrote is called Cory's Shift, Cutting a New Track, is the subtitle. And that really completes this whole whole transformation of him. He's still a musician, but really what drives him and what fulfills him and his mission, if you will. And some of it has to do with the guilt issue, as we hit in the first book, propelling him into, like say the greater good, kind of a, I don't want to use the word superhero, but, trying to atone for his.
To be the better person kind of
yes,
thing.
Yes. The thing that we all do, look, we try to be better than we were yesterday. That's all we can do.
Exactly.
Right?
So book 2, is it continuing off right at the end of book 1 then? Or is there some time between the two books?
There's some time. There's a little bit of time.
Okay.
There's a little bit of time, but the same players essentially are in there.
Okay.
So you're gonna have Cory, you're gonna have the nasty Tower, Barney Tower, the lawyer, and you had Black, Mr. Black, the mysterious character, who, by the way, I've received, even my editor has told me that you should spin this guy off on a series or something. You even should get Black somewhere because he's such an intriguing character. And many people have told me, many readers have reached out to me and said, hey, this guy's so intriguing, man. I really like this guy. So I've been trying to play around in the back of my head about how to either to make him more a central character, if you will, or to spin him off somehow. So that may see something there.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting because his character is very shadowed because that's his line of work. No one's supposed to really know he's there or what he's doing. And so that would be very interesting to see what he does behind the scenes for his work.
No, you're right. You used the right word. Your shadowing is exactly the way it is. And he appears in the next 2 books big time. And then he actually even kind of shapeshiftery in book 2. So, which is, kind of serves his that character's role or kind of supports what he's all about. So anyway, I think, I don't want to say too much because I hope a reader or some listener will be intrigued enough to pick up the books. But I'm really proud of that because it also of that series only because I don't want to use the word stuck. I've enjoyed the heck out of writing Luca just to be able to quote unquote pull off another series and receive some positive feedback is certainly helps to stoke the motivation. Exactly.
It's refreshing to start writing a new character, a new storyline.
Yeah, right. And that actually feeds back into anything you do, right? It really does feedback because it kind of like creative well stirs everything up. And somewhere in this crazy mind of ours, these things just,
they're working.
They are.
So what was the main inspiration for Cory's storyline? Was there something that happened in the media or a story that you had heard about somebody stealing music, or did it just kind of pop into your head one day?
It kind of popped in my head. I play music as well. So I've been playing the saxophone for a number of years in a bunch of bands. And I was always intrigued about music. Who isn't? Who didn't want to be a rock star? Who didn't want to write the hit song, right? It's actually probably more, I'd rather write a hit song maybe than a hit book,
Right.
It's just closer to the culture, right? The culture is really music driven. But I always wondered there was a story. I can't remember who wrote it. I think Jeremy Irons might have been playing the lead role in it. Either he stole a manuscript or he found the manuscript and he took credit for it. It was something that maybe it's something in the war. I'm trying to piece together the movie. I saw it probably 20 years ago.
Right.
But it always intrigued me about music because in the jazz, I play jazz music, and it was always common knowledge that crediting for songs was always poorly done. So that the publishers would take credit because they would get the royalties as the songwriter. So many songs that say, just for argument's sake, I'm going to choose a name like Miles Davis wrote it.
Right.
He may not have written it. Okay. It was written by Bill Evans, the pianist that played with him. But Miles Davis took, he got it. He got all the checks. And that was within a band. And then when you talk about the industry, the guys who were signing these acts and publishing that stuff, they were taking the songwriting credit. So I knew it was a very easy thing to steal. Yeah. Very easy thing to steal. Maybe not so easy today in that sense, because people know the value of it, right?
Right.
So that's kind of, I probably was that in the back of my head, and that's probably, I can't say that it was a wow, this is what I got to do. Yeah, it wasn't one of those. Yeah,
right. So when you were writing, I always ask people what their favorite character is within their book, or who is your favorite character to write? Because sometimes your favorite character is difficult to write, and then there's a different one who is more of your favorite because it comes easier. So do you have a favorite that stands out either in this book or in your series who you just really enjoy writing?
Well, I like writing Luca. I do because because here's the other thing. The Luca series is first person, except the first book, which was Am I the Killer? So that was third person. To be able to write in that, assume that role and speak directly to it is a little easier, right? This book, I believe anyway, it was written in third person, but deep POV, third person deep. So I do know what's going on in Cory's head, and there's the internal stuff that's going on. So it's a little, I find that harder actually, right? In third person, rather than first. And I understand why we need third person, So I would say that I enjoy writing Luca the best. And who do I don't like writing? Oof.
That's always a tough one.
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah, because sometimes you can't find the character's voice, or you believe you can't find the character's voice, right? I don't know if this happens to you, but to me, what I found as when I'm struggling to get the words out, whatever it may be, maybe it's a dialogue, maybe it's description, whatever it may be. Years ago, I used to just go, let me wait for the muse to come fly in the room, and it's not happening. It's not happening. To me, those are excuses today. Now I say, keep my butt in the chair, force it out. And the funny thing, or revelatory thing, was that when you go back and read what you wrote, when you thought you were struggling, you really can't tell where it came easy and where it didn't. And that's very surprising to me, because I thought you would notice, right? You would see, you go, it was clunky, but it really isn't. Maybe I've trained myself to believe that.
Right.
Self-delusion is just great. But I do believe that if you force yourself to do it, it'll come out and it'll be okay. And if it isn't okay, when you go back, you can tidy it up.
Exactly.
We have to tidy it up anyway. So,
That's what editing is for.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you have to go back. I'm not one of those people. I don't know you. Some people, there's a lot of different styles, right? I mean, pantser, discovery, plotter, blah, blah, blah. But even in the process of writing, some people go back to the last 500 words. Some people read what they wrote yesterday, then go on. Right. I don't do any of that. I just keep on going.
Me too.
I just keep on going. And then when I go back, sometimes I surprise myself. Say, wow, I wrote that? I don't remember that. That's pretty good. Sometimes I go, that's not too good,
Right. I feel like if I go back and read what I wrote the day before, I get confused in my writing, because I'm like, did I already say something before, or am I going to write it again because I'm thinking about it? So I just pick off exactly where I start or where I ended the day before and just keep on plowing.
Yeah. And part of me, I do the same thing, Laura. I find that's the way that works for me, or I think it works for me, right? You never really know until you try other things. You do have to be open to changing your process a little bit. If not, then you might be missing out on something. But I'm also a heavy duty productivity shame person, So I for me to quote unquote waste time reading what I wrote yesterday, and then that's an hour later when I got to start typing, I'm like, oh
yeah, I could have been writing.
I didn't do anything. I didn't get anything, So I'm looking for, but I'm struggling now with this new book that I'm writing. I really am, because I'm only writing a couple hundred words a day. But usually I peg myself for a minimum of 1,000 a day and try to get that done. And sometimes I reach 2,000, but most of the time, 1,200, 1,300, and I say, that's it, I'm done. And try to do the other things that you have to do in this game. Right.
Exactly. It's a business. There's so many moving parts.
Oh my God. And it's moving. And not only is it moving, it's moving fast, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the game always seems to be changing. There's something new every day. And you're going like, oh my God,
You're a discovery writer. So
yes,
you discover your characters and your plot as you write. You said you have a basic outline that you write out, but it's not too descriptive. So how long does it take you to actually write an entire book using that process? Because I'm a pantser too. I sit down, I write my book. I don't have too much of an outline. So I'm just curious how long it took you to write, say, the most recent Cory.
Well, essentially, I usually give myself about 90 days. So the way I look at it is, if I wrote 1,000 words a day for 90 days, it's 90,000 words. And my books aren't that long, but I look at the whole process. So I'll have an idea, like the idea that I started on this new book. I'll have that idea percolating as I'm writing these other books and doing whatever it is I'm doing. Maybe I'm rewriting. So I'm starting to think about this thing. And then you toy around with it for the first week or so, right? You go like, okay, I need this guy. Is he married? Is he not married? The character, you try to have a little idea about where they are. And then you try to lay out. What I try to do is, and I've done everything. I mean, I took a class from Ken Follett, masterclass about plotting. That he writes like an 80-page plot outline.
Crazy.
And then he goes, the book is easy to write. And I go, let me try that. It was torture. I hated it. You know, I have fun doing what I do. And like what you do the same way, and calling it discovery. I don't start with nothing. I start with an idea, the main story, right? And that in the case of the Cory's Dilemma, it was a man who achieved success by cheating, essentially. So that's my main idea. Now, how am I gonna? And I knew it was going to happen as a result of that, but I didn't have these characters. I created Mr. Black just because it said, "Hey, I need this guy." And I'm not even sure about the lawyer if I even knew him in advance, if he was going to be in the book or not. But I had a few things. I knew he was going to be married. I knew he was going to have a couple of kids. I knew he was going to live in Brooklyn and move to the city. Those types of things I knew. I find that once you define, and it's not easy, and I don't always do it. Once you define the character, they'll take you places that you could no way have written in an outline.
Exactly.
No way. Yeah.
And that's something that excites me about writing, is that a lot of my characters who developed within my first book, I didn't know they existed until I was in the trenches and writing. And I'm like, who is this person that I'm writing about? I didn't know who they were. Black was not a character that you knew about before. How did he come about?
Well, I knew that someone's coming after Cory, if you will, right? Let's say the blackmailer. Now, I know the first thing we all do is we try to circle the wagons, right? Every institution, everybody, and he has these people around him. Now he's a successful star. He reaches out to his confidant, if you will, his handler, and he says, "Hey, man, I need somebody to do something, find out who somebody is. Who do you know anybody, that could do security or whatever it is?" And she says, "Yeah, I got a couple of names." She gives it to him. And then he calls, and this one guy, he meets with him. And then I started thinking, wow, like this guy, he works on the fringes, right? He's not, he doesn't work for Brink Security,
Right.
And he handles a lot of high profile people when they have problems. So I don't know what they call it. I would say a fixer, if that's the right word. He was a fixer. I guess that was the original idea that I had, that we need a fixer. Again, I'm going to go back to your word, shadowy. I said, wow, let me make this guy a little,
mysterious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't give him too much. So
I love it. Yeah, I don't want to go too much more into details, just because we don't want to give any spoilers for anybody, because we want everybody to read your book.
Yes, I'd like to. I hope so.
Exactly. So, and then one other part I did want to point out in the book is there's a lot of family dynamics. This guy goes into stardom and he blows up. And so that's going to affect your home life, obviously your work life completely. And Cory and his wife, they end up going to see a therapist. And I thought that was so true to life, because a lot of people are still hesitant about going to see a therapist and mental health. And so that was just a huge component that I really enjoyed, brought it more into like, okay, this is real life. So if you want to elaborate on any of that, how that came about, just take it away.
The good thing, or the cheating thing that I did, if you will, is that Dr. Bruno, who's the therapist in that, she is also in the Luca series. And I had to create that. I created that therapist there. I don't know if you get the connection, because she's in the one book, she's down in Florida up there, but I used the same character in my head anyway to service both points. My contribution, or my thought process was, I think that there's a stigma, right? When you go to any mental health issue. So there's a stigma attached to that, much like, let's say, and again, the traumatic brain injury, going back to that one, that's an invisible thing. Exactly. If somebody is missing, again, it sounds terrible, but somebody's missing a leg, we automatically visually see, wow, we have some empathy for that person, or sympathy rather, and we're going to be kinder than we should, right? But if somebody has something going on up here, we're going to go, that freaking guy's a wacko. Exactly. What the hell's wrong with him? And we have no concept about the struggle or the illness or the injury that they may have. I just like to bring that out, that there should be no shame to go to the doctor, whether you have cancer or some mental issue that you're struggling, whether it be a relationship issue, a guilt issue, I don't know, addiction, whatever. Get the freaking help. And don't worry about what anybody's going to say. That's it. I really believe that. So that's so I'm unafraid to bring that in. I haven't been to a marriage. I'm happily married 37 years, believe it or not. So we haven't had those struggles. Not to say life has been pieces and
right. But yeah, it's an important thing to highlight, that everybody needs help.
Right. Well, I think I don't need it, but I try to resolve a lot of stuff in my own head, right? Put things in perspective through life experience and this and that. But maybe I had a mother and father that gave me certain, they covered certain wounds that other people didn't have, that, they could have been experienced something. And it doesn't have to be abusive if you will, but
Right.
that left the hole that, you need help somebody covering it up and, working you through it. Nothing wrong with it, man. Nothing wrong with
Exactly.
it.
Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with it.
No.
All right. So I feel like I learned so much about, you and your books, and this has just been really great. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. And I know you're not
No.
too much of a whiskey drinker, but go ahead, fill us in. What's your favorite whiskey? And if you don't like whiskey, what's your favorite drink?
Well, I grew up drinking Dewar's, okay, and then I was a Johnny Black drinker for quite a while. I still drink the occasional sip of Shivers. I just had a very, very old Calvados, which is, excuse me, not Calvados, Armagnac.
Okay.
French Armagnac. It was actually 1957, which is the year that I was born. And that's why I had it with a couple of buddies. But my beverage of choice is, I'm a big wine guy. In the Lucas series, he's a police officer, but he's not a big drink. He's a beer drinker, if you will. But the coroner is a high-end wine guy, and he's teaching Frank a little bit about wine. I really enjoy wine. I'm a particularly lean towards French reds from the Southern Rhone region. So, like a Chateauneuf de Pape or something like that, Côte de Rhone. So I like all that stuff, but I like to drink in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dan, this was so much fun. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can find your books and learn more about you?
Well, the easiest place would be just directly at my website, which is www.danpetrosini.com. Or you could look me up on Amazon. I'm out there. But yeah, so you can find me on Amazon, BookBub, Goodreads, everywhere that you would find your favorite books. But the simplest way is either at my website or at Amazon.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Laura, I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. I look forward to seeing you soon, and I wish you the best in life.
Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers.
Speaking with Dan was so much fun. We had a great time chatting. Obviously, you heard. And he is one of the few authors that I have left in season 1 of Read It with Whiskey. Originally, I thought, okay, I'm going to be talking to all the genres, all of the indie authors, anybody who applies, I want to talk to them because I want to help them grow their business, right? That is one of the reasons why I am creating this podcast, to help indie authors grow their following and sell more books. But this is also for the reader. And looking back at season 1, what I've noticed most is that the fantasy and sci-fi genres are really my bread and butter. I love reading all genres. I love speaking to all of these different authors, but I've decided that moving into season 2, we're going to focus on only sci-fi and fantasy. So this episode with Dan is the beginning of the end of season 1. We've just got a few more episodes with genre authors that are not sci-fi or fantasy. And once season 1 rolls together, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Once season 1 ends, then we're going to go ahead and move into season 2, where we're going to talk all sci-fi fantasy. And I'm really, really excited about this transition, you guys. Obviously, I want to help all authors, but I want to niche down and make sure this podcast is really speaking to the listener, which is the reader. So the readers definitely have interacted more with the sci-fi and fantasy genres. Not saying that the other episodes haven't had interaction, they just haven't had as much. And I think it really translates because I am a sci-fi author and I'm going to be stepping into the fantasy world in November for NaNoWriMo. I have a really cool idea, you guys. I'm so excited to write it, but I've got to finish the Shockwave series first. So I'm waiting until November to start on the fantasy. Anyway, let's get back to business here. So next week, we will be featuring an author. I have 2 authors left within season 1, so you guys will be able to listen to those episodes, and then we will jump into season 2. You guys, this is so exciting. This is a huge milestone for me that I've actually been able to get through an entire season on a podcast. There's so many podcasts out there who fizzle and fall apart, and maybe they have 10 episodes, maybe they have 20, but they just kind of disappear after a while. And I am so fortunate to have all of you listening and all of you on social media highlighting me and making sure that I am staying busy and keeping going, because your support means so much to me. And it really does. It drives me to keep going, to keep recording, to keep reading. And I'm really, really honored that you all are a part of this podcast. So again, I know I mentioned it earlier, but again, if you want to be a sponsor of the podcast and really keep it going, if you are a sci-fi and fantasy reader, then you definitely want to jump into Patreon because there's going to be some awesome content there coming soon in season 2. So get your foot in the door now. Go to patreon.com/readitwithwhiskey, and I'll see you guys next week in next week's episode. Bye.